All right, how's everyone doing this morning? You guys doing all right? All right, well, good. Thank you guys for coming. My name's Chris. I'm one of the pastors here at Water Life Church. I just wanted to give a shout out to the people who made this video, and there are two people in particular. Fernando, who was singing up here on stage, he did all the animation for this. Isn't that cool? Yeah, that's awesome. And did you recognize the voice on there? Yeah, that's Daniel, all right? Daniel, he wrote that song. He sang that song, produced it, all right? So, made by Fernando, song by Daniel. Isn't that awesome? Man, we have such talented people at Water Life Church. We used to buy a lot of the stuff to do that, but more and more we're just getting it made by the talented people at Water Life because we have so many gifts and talents here, and we just love taking what God has given to people and putting it to work in His kingdom. So we're excited about that. Like Todd said earlier, we're starting a new series on change. Is anybody going through any changes right now? Anybody? Yeah, probably almost all of us probably raise our hand, right? Because life is always changing. And I'll tell you, everyone's going through all kinds of changes. Changes are happening all over the place. And for some people, they kind of like change, right? Some people are really like change fans, right? If you're drinking coffee in the morning, you're drinking one of these mugs, right? I love change, right? These are the people who, they don't like to vacation in the same spot every year. They like a new place every time, right? These are the people who kind of get bored easily. They're always looking for, I want a new version of my phone because this one's like a year old and I want something new. I want a new car. I want something different. Can we move to a new place? I want to do something different. They get bored. They get antsy really easily, and they're always looking for something different. I'll tell you, with our services coming up, it's interesting that we're doing a series on change, and we're at a different place for every time we do one of these sermons, right? So Civic Center today, part 2, it's at the Hub. Part 3, it's in the park. For you change people, you're just like, oh, that's no problem. I'll just go to a different place. I'll just go to church at the Hub next week. I'll just go to church in the park. That sounds great. Who are the change people out there? Who are people who love change? Yeah, we've got a bunch of them. That might be even half of you. I don't know. And half of us, maybe the other half, are like, no, I'm not a big fan of change. I like stability. I like consistency. I like routine. I like to know what's going on at all times. When I find something and I like it, I'm going to stay that way, right? If I got my iPhone 5C and I like it, I don't want to change I don't want to get an iPhone 6. I just want to stay the same because if it works, why fix it? If it's not broke, why fix it? Stay on vacation in the same spot every year because I know that spot. That's my place, right? Maybe watch a TV series every week or eat at the same restaurant. Who are the people who like stability and consistency? So it's like about half and half. That's kind of interesting. I'll tell you, I'll just give it away. I love change, right? I'm a change guy. I love to do different things all the time. I'm always looking at where's the new place to eat or what's the new thing to do. We vacationed at that place last year. Why would we go back? We've already been there. Let's go somewhere different, right? A couple of years ago, my wife and I went to Mexico, and we went to one of these all-inclusive resorts. I was performing the wedding ceremony, my brother down there, and I don't know if you've ever been to one of these all-inclusive resorts in Mexico. It's like they take a couple acres of America, and they just pick it up, and they plant it down in the middle of Mexico, and they build walls around it, right? That's what they do, right? So we're in there, and they build walls around it so nothing uncomfortable can come in, and it's safe and all that. But for me, it's kind of like vacationing at the Golden Corral with a beach. Right? It's kind of like that. I know I'm knocking half the people probably are mad at me now because half the people like consistency, right? But I'll tell you, for me, those walls weren't to keep, the bad guys out. It was to trap me inside, right? I had to get out of that place. And the most fun, besides, doing my brother's wedding ceremony, the most fun was when my wife and I just rented an old car and we just got out on the road and started driving in real Mexico. Right? And we got to go to little places to eat that were run by like Mexican people, not by a corporation in the United States that owns that property. Right? So we loved that. I love the change that comes. But whether you love change or love consistency and stability, change is inevitable, isn't it? Life does not stay the same for long. And if you're thinking like nothing's changing in my life, you might be the exception to the norm. And if nothing's changing in your life right now, just hold on. Because just around the corner, something's going to change, right? Because change is happening all the time. And that's why we're doing this series because we've seen so many people going through life change, and we thought, well, what can we do to prepare people for change? How can we help people react to change? How can we help people initiate positive change? So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to take 3 Bible characters and see how they dealt with crazy change that happened in their life, and what they did right and what they did wrong. So today, we're talking about how to prepare for change with a guy named Joseph, and what he did to prepare for the crazy change that he would see in his life. And then the next week, we're talking about Job and how we can react to change, because Job had a bunch of crazy changes in his life. We'll see how he reacted to it. And then the week after that, we're going to look at David and how he initiated some really positive change in his life. Because here's the thing about change. When things change, especially when they're a negative change, it can really test our faith. It can be really hard on our faith. And we at Water Life Church, we want people to prepare for it and grow in their faith through the change. Because change is inevitable, but growth is optional. You don't have to grow when things change. But we want people to grow when things change. When things change in my life, I want to grow from it. I want to be strengthened by it and not tore down by it. So that's why we're doing this series. We want to prepare people for change. And we're going to start off with a story from Stephanie and a change that she did not see coming.
I was born and raised with an amazing set of parents that taught me what it was to be a Christian and exactly who I needed to be as I grew up. I was married by the age of 21 to someone that I thought was the best that I could get. We were complete opposites, and we just had, a different outlook on life. So I divorced. I then ventured out and, kind of lived the wild life that I never had. I put God on the back burner and partied, drank, did everything that, I wasn't supposed to do and never really wanted to do. I found out I was pregnant with Ava, and, it was rough. It was hard. I was alone, but she was the turning point in my life when I realized that I could no longer control my day-to-day actions. I couldn't control who I was going to be with. I needed to give it all to God and let Him be the one to, just set me forth in my life and make me who I was going to be. So on October 4th, 2008, Aaron and I married. Ava was 13 months old, and we still put God on the back burner. There's always tomorrow. But the reality of it is there isn't a guaranteed tomorrow. Well, on July 14th, 2013, my life changed forever. I started having symptoms of something like I'd never felt before. My whole side was tingling. I was numb. So we went to the emergency room at Caldwell, and they did a CT scan. A couple hours later, they sent me home, told me I had a migraine. That evening, I got out of bed and completely just collapsed in the floor. I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't move. Everything was just limp. We found out that I had a vessel that was torn in my right side of my neck that caused a blood clot to form and traveled to my brain. I laid in my bed in Catawba for 3 weeks, and I would just sit in the dark and sing and listen to Carrie Job, and tears would just stream down my face. And I prayed and I vowed to God that I would sing again, and I would worship Him, and I would use the talents and the gifts that He's given me to bring others to Christ. Even though I went through what I went through, I can now take that hurt and take that pain and share it and let others know that even though God throws obstacles at you and He throws pain and suffering, it's only a lesson. It's a training lesson to help you see that God can be there for you. He can help you. He can make you get through things that you would never think possible. And I know deep down that had I not had God in my life, I would not be where I am today.
So thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your story with us. Isn't that awesome? I mean, I didn't script her to say all these things that were just incredible things to say. Obstacles, pain, and suffering is like training. You know, God can get you through the barriers and the toughest things you never thought you could get through. Right? I mean, that's her real experience. That's real life, real experience, and a real God holding people up in times of tremendous change and supporting them. And now Stephanie's here on stage, and you saw her on stage, right, singing today. I mean, it's just incredible. God's doing good things, and God wants to take our change, right, and take these changes and not only just help us survive, but help us to thrive through these changes, as tough as they are. And there's some tough stuff going on. So with all these changes, you never know, how do you prepare for something like that? Some things you really can't totally prepare for this. You never know what your life is going to look like tomorrow, what changes might happen. But there are things you can do to prepare and have a foundation for when whatever change happens, you can not only survive, but thrive. Now, there's all kinds of changes that you're going to face in your life, right? There's health changes like Stephanie's. Sometimes those are followed by financial changes. Sometimes financial changes just happen on their own. Sometimes there's family changes. There's spiritual changes in your life. But with all these changes, preparation can help you get through these obstacles, right? And let's take finances, for example. Anybody listen to Dave Ramsey ever? Or you guys are familiar with Dave Ramsey, probably. Very popular financial help with a spiritual edge to it. And he talks about this thing called Murphy's Law. Have you ever heard of Murphy's Law? Yeah, well, Murphy's Law says this. If it can go wrong, what'll happen? It will go wrong. Has anybody ever felt like Murphy's Law is kind of stalking you? Right? I mean, has it ever felt like, oh, this is just one of these days, something goes wrong and then something else, or this is one of these weeks, or this is just one of those years where it seems like there's a financial challenge time after time again, right? I mean, I maybe get sick and go to the emergency room, which costs a fortune, right? And then my dog gets sick the next day and I got to go to the vet, which costs a fortune too, right? I mean, these things just happen to us, right? Or your taxes are due and your car breaks down the next day. Right? Or something happens, you spend some money, you take yourself to the edge just a little bit, and the air conditioner breaks down, right? Does that happen to anybody else? All right, if Rebecca's in the audience, just take in mind, because she thinks it just happens to us, right? No, it happens to other people, Murphy's Law. But Dave Ramsey says, if you prepare financially, because you know about Murphy's Law, you can actually kick Murphy out of your house. Right? You can kick him out of the house if you get a bit of an emergency fund. He suggests 3 to 6 months worth of income, which is a huge challenge. But if you have an emergency fund, you get some kind of financial challenge and it doesn't break you. It's just a bump in the road, right? It doesn't tear you down. It holds you back for a little bit. You got to change your plans a little bit. A little preparation prepares us. A little preparation can kick Murphy out of your life. So it's the same thing like that within all our areas of life. So family, if you are building into your family when the times are good, right? You're connecting with your kids, you're talking with them, right? You're having a good relationship with them. When things go bad or when you hit the teen years, you can maybe survive, right? You can, if you prepare in advance, if you built that family foundation, that relationship, that trust, when you hit those troubled years or something happens or your teen flips out or something like that, right? You can handle that because you've built a strong foundation. You've had some preparation. Same thing is true with your health. If you go to the gym, you work out, you eat right, you exercise, all that kind of thing, you'll get sick less. And when you do get sick, you'll bounce back quicker. Most of the time, right? It's not always true, but preparation physically helps us a lot. Well, the same thing is true about your spiritual lives. If you can prepare spiritually, you can handle the negative changes that come along in life, and you can stand firm. And there are things that you can do spiritually to prepare for that. And we're going to take those things out of a guy named Joseph. Joseph was in the Old Testament, and this is one of the most epic stories of the Old Testament. It's found in Genesis, chapters 37 right through chapters 50. So it's like 13 chapters long. It's a big story. We're not going to read it all. I'm going to give you like a 2-minute summary, which is a little bit of a shame, but that's all the time we have, right? Joseph in just a couple minutes. This is awesome. All right, Joseph was the youngest of 11 brothers. He was like the little kid out of all these brothers. Any youngest siblings here? Yeah, okay, yeah. Any oldest siblings here? So you might be able to relate to this, all right? Because Joseph, he was the youngest kid and he was a tattletale. I don't know if you guys can. In my family, my youngest brother was a bit like that, all right? And he was spoiled, right? I'm not talking my family only, but Joseph as well, all right? I don't know if you can relate to that in your family hierarchy of where the siblings lay out, but I'll tell you, for me and my family, my brother, when I came along, my parents were like gung-ho. We're going to parent this guy. I mean, we're going to parent and do everything. And I just got the brunt of their parenting. And by the time my brother Kevin came along, I was just like, whatever, he'll be fine. It'll be okay. And Kevin got away with anything, right? But the same was true with Joseph. You can attest to this guy. I know a lot of you can relate to that. Joseph was that youngest brother. It was a tattletale. It says it in chapter 37. It actually says it, right? And he got spoiled, and his dad made it worse by just not hiding his favoritism at all. So Joseph got like the Calvin Klein shirt and coat and everything like that. He did. He got this designer clothing, or his brothers just got, sheepskins or something like that. So he got all this stuff. His dad treated him like a favorite. And then Joseph goes and starts telling people his dreams of how his family all bowed down to him. Not the wisest thing to share when you're already kind of a spoiled younger sibling. All right? So his brothers, not only did they hate him, they despised him to the point of actually wanting to kill him. Literally. Literally, they were plotting to murder their brother. They hated him so badly. And they found an opportunity. They were alone out shepherding their sheep. Joseph comes up in his Calvin Klein shirt, right, and his coat and everything, and they're just like, that's it. That's the final straw. We're killing him now. But the older brother, Reuben, and older brothers usually have some maybe responsibility, that kind of thing. He says, no, let's not kill him. Let's throw him in a pit and make some money off of him. Okay, so they're like, that sounds good. They throw him in a pit. They sell him to some slave traders. He ends up in Egypt, right, where actually things start to look pretty good as a slave still, so not that good, right? So he's in there, I think he's kind of getting his feet back up under him. He's living in a nice place as a slave, but the head of the slaves, right? And then he gets framed for attempted rape, thrown back in prison, and this time it's even worse. He's in prison. He's in chains, right? But while he's in jail, he interprets some dreams for some fellow prisoners, and the dreams turn out miraculously to be true. Exactly how Joseph said they would turn out. Well, the guys who had their dreams interpreted, they forget that he made those interpretations. And the one guy gets out, ends up working for the king, and all of a sudden the king, years down the road, the king has some crazy dreams, and then the guy remembers, oh yeah, there's a guy in jail, he's still there in jail, who can interpret dreams, and he did a really good job. So the king is calling, Joseph comes up, meets the king, interprets his dreams. The dreams start turning out exactly like Joseph said. Joseph puts his 2 cents in there to say, Pharaoh, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. So Joseph throws his 2 cents in to say, you better start preparing because the famine's going to be pretty bad. That's what your dream means. Pharaoh says, this guy's pretty wise. I'm going to place my bets on Joseph. And Joseph is made just second under the king, under Pharaoh, and he's in charge of all the resources of Egypt. And sure enough, the plenty time comes, the famine comes, and it's brutal. But because of Joseph, not only do they survive, but they thrive. Egypt has the only grain in the whole area, and they are selling it, and people will pay anything for that because they're starving. Egypt is making out like crazy. They have money, they have grain, they have food because Joseph was there, right? Pretty soon back home, they're starving too. They come to Egypt looking for food, Joseph's family. They end up in front of Joseph and not knowing it. Joseph is by then 30. He was only 17 when they sold him as a slave. And they don't recognize him, but Joseph says, guys, it's me, Joseph. I forgive you. Why don't y'all come and live with me? And they do, right? The whole family picks up and moves. Dad is overjoyed. His son is still alive, right? And they live happily ever after, almost, right? They actually live there for, their family lives there for 400 years in Egypt. And by then, they're not just a family anymore. They're a nation 400 years later. And by then, they're not treated like royalty anymore. They're treated like slaves as well when Moses comes along. An interesting connection here, right? You got Joseph, that's how they got into Egypt. You got Moses, that's how they got out of Egypt, right? And Moses took them out. And in a little verse in Genesis, it talks about Moses and the Israelites leaving Egypt. It says, you might have missed it, it says Moses took the bones of Joseph along with the Israelites when they left Egypt. It kind of bookends that. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's one of the most epic stories of the Bible. Isn't that awesome? Man, read the whole 13 chapters. It is incredible. But there are some things that Joseph did that helped him with this change, because he went through this crazy change, right? He was the spoiled, rotten, rich kid, right? Then he had nothing. Thrown in a pit, beat up, bloody, sold as a slave. Then things were finally looking good. Then he was thrown in prison. Then everyone forgot about him, even though he was interpreting dreams. And finally, at the end of it, he comes about, and it's a great, happy ending. But I'll tell you, he went through all those changes, and he not only survived, but he thrived because of, I'm going to give you 3 things on how he did it and how you can do this too in your life. Now, there's more than 3, but here's just 3. Number 1, Joseph was connected to God. How do you survive? How do you prepare for change? Be connected to God. It says it right in Genesis 39, verse 2 and verse 21. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him. Wherever Joseph went, whether it's in a pit or in a jail or on the throne, the Lord was with Joseph. He had that connection. And not only did he have a connection, but he gave glory to God for this connection. So when he would interpret dreams, it says this. He says, do not interpretations belong to God? Right? He didn't say, hey, I can interpret dreams. In fact, he said the opposite. He said to Pharaoh, the king, he said, I cannot do it. I cannot interpret your dream, but God will give Pharaoh the answer. So not only was Joseph connected to God, but he gave all the glory to God. He was humble. He put God first and foremost in everything he did. And God not only blessed him for his connection to God, God blessed everyone around him because of his connection. And that's my prayer for us as Christians. If we're following Jesus, it's not just for us. It's for everyone around us. Is our faith blessing people around us? Is it blessing people in our work, in our home? If you're a student, is your faith, if you follow Jesus, is it a blessing to people in your school? Does it bless your teacher, your principal, right? Does your faith bless people around you? It did with Joseph. Listen to this. From the time that he put him in charge of all his household, and this was Potiphar, the master when Joseph was a slave, and all that he owned, the Lord blessed not Joseph, but the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph, right? So Joseph had this connection. He put God first, and it blessed him, and it blessed all those around him. And because he had that deep connection, that was preparation for when the changes came in his life. And that's why he could not only survive, but thrive. And Jesus picks up on this way later. And Jesus tells us the same thing in Matthew. I always love to connect up those Old Testament people to the New Testament people because there's such a strong connection. They teach the same principles. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 7. He says, and you've heard the story, you might have heard the song. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Right? Wise man built his house on a rock if you listen to the words and do the words of Jesus. And the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew, and they beat against the house, which means changes came. Right? The guy was living his life, and changes happened, and these were negative changes. And yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. And what is the rock? The rock is the words of Jesus and putting them into practice, right? That's the rock. That's the foundation. Jesus said the same thing as Joseph was doing. Have a connection with me and you'll be able to stand firm. But not so with the foolish man. It continues, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice. So you can hear the Bible all day long. You could come to church. You could hear it on the radio. If you hear the Word of God, but you don't put it into practice, you still fall under the foolish category. Like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, right? The same thing happens. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, and they beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. His life collapsed. The version in Luke says the house was completely destroyed. Completely destroyed. Jesus wants our life to stand firm. Notice that who experienced the negative changes? The foolish guy or the wise guy? Who experienced the negative changes? They both did. Right? The Bible doesn't say the good guys are just going to be, it's going to be easy street for the good guys. Right? Everything's going to go great for the good guys, but the bad guys are going to suffer. Well, not according to this story. According to this story, the same things happen to both of them. They both go through incredible negative life change in this story, but the difference is the one guy is built on a foundation, the other guy is not built on anything that's going to hold him. Right? If you prepare spiritually for change, you can stand on that foundation. If you have a connection with God, that's preparation for change that can hold you up through those tough times. So, that's one thing. Be connected to God. Another thing, how do you prepare for it? Live with integrity and character. And Joseph really did that. He had integrity. He had character. Here's this guy. He's 22 years old when he's in Potiphar's household, right? And the Bible actually says he's another one of these dark, good-looking, handsome, athletic guys. The Bible says that. It says that about him. And here he is, 22 years old. He's single, good-looking guy, right? He's the head of that area, right? And here's this cougar wife hitting on him every day. Every day. Let's look what it says about it. It tells a little bit about this. And this is Joseph speaking. He says, "My master has withheld from me nothing except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. And it continues. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." 22, good-looking guy, right? I mean, part of us is like, that's against all odds, Joseph. That's impossible, right? But Joseph, he left his cloak in her hands and ran out the door, right? I mean, he fled from temptation. 2 Timothy 22 in the New Testament says the same thing. Timothy is saying, flee, run from temptation of your youth, of young people. Always do the right thing. Have integrity, have character. Joseph had that. That was his preparation for the tough times. He also had integrity and character when his brothers came back to him, and he could have taken his revenge, right? He could have said, "Aha, you're back. Now you're going to jail. See how it feels, guys." But he didn't, right? He knew it was part of God's bigger plan. Listen to this part of the story. It says this. He's talking to his brothers after he's on the throne, and they're bowing down to him. He says, "Don't be distressed. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. God sent me ahead of you to save your lives and be a great deliverance." Joseph sees the big picture. So think, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me the ruler out of Egypt from all this. Joseph had integrity and character to make the right choices and to forgive his brothers and see that's a part of God's bigger plan. How's your integrity? How's your character? When you have little, do you make the right decision? When it's behind closed doors and no one's looking, like in Joseph's case with Potiphar's wife, do you make the right decisions? Do you make the right decisions in the little things, in the big things? When you have good integrity, great character, it's preparation for when the change is coming. And Joseph did one more thing I'd like to just highlight. Joseph was responsible. He was responsible for with what God had given him. Because sometimes I feel like in my life, man, if God would only give me money, I could make better decisions, right? If God had only given me this talent or this education, or if I would only have the cards in my favor more often, it would go better for me and I would make better decisions when the changes happen. But look at Joseph's life. Joseph went from something to nothing, right? He went from spoiled rich kid to in the pit, no clothes, beat up, sold as a slave. He had nothing. But yet Joseph believed with God on his side, he had everything he needed. He had everything he needed. He had nothing, and yet he didn't need any of that stuff because he had God on his side. Then he's doing good. Things are going all right. Then he gets thrown in jail, and he has less than nothing. Because now not only does he have no clothes, and he's in jail. He's got chains on his hands and on his feet. He's got less than nothing. But for Joseph, if God was on his side, he didn't need anything else. And he just took what he had, which was nothing, and God. And he said, that's all I have. I'm going to work with what I got. I'm going to take my little bit and I'm going to work with what I've got. And I'll tell you, every time Joseph took that responsibility, and God blessed him through it. So you might think, I don't have much, right? I have very little. How am I supposed to make an impact? When changes come in my life, how am I supposed to be strong because I have so little? Joseph had nothing, but with God, he had everything he needed. And that's like that with our lives, right? If change is coming, if we have God in our lives, the amount of money we have or the amount of talents or abilities we think we're missing out on, with God in our lives, we have everything we need. In fact, God excels in taking people who have nothing else but Him and helping them to stand on a firm foundation and changing the world through those people. So I find that inspiring. Joseph had that responsibility. So where's the challenge for us? How are we going to prepare for change? Are you connected with God? How's your integrity? How's your character? Even behind closed doors, even when no one's looking, right? And are you taking responsibility saying, God, this is all I've got, but I'm using it for your glory, right? When you do those things, and those are just a couple things, but those things will prepare us for change.